Now let's talk about Google. Google apparently has lost a little mojo.
Yep.
You were telling me about this. So over the last 12 months, there have been some noise coming out of Google, hasn't there?
No,
and there
absolutely.
certainly hasn't been new products coming out of Google. Android is separate. Who's driving the Android train right now? Really, Samsung with those
phones.
Those phones.
Yep.
Really, on a global basis, and then you've got a lot of the generic vanilla Android phones are all over the United States, India, and what have you. All over the world, in places like India, where I think in India they outnumber iPhones significantly. But
interesting.
Whatever it is. But anyway, Google has lost its mojo.
Yep, it's lost quite a few jobs as well in terms of the hypergrowth. I think in 2021, they cut 218,000 jobs. So I think that not only are they seeing decrease in jobs, but also some of the perks. You want to talk about some of those?
218,000 jobs. Good grief. That's like 2 1/3 Super Bowls.
Yeah.
You take all the people in a Super Bowl stadium, let's say they all work for Google, and do that 2 1/3 times, all those people have been, Google no longer needs your services. Oh no special lunch made by the private chef on my floor.
Yeah, no, for sure. And not only did they cut the jobs, but also in terms of how it was communicated, because a lot of these were mass layoffs with semi-anonymous random emails coming in at the middle of the night, or people showing up to office on Monday morning and their key card isn't working, and then suddenly they're like, well, I guess, what does this mean, and stuff like that. Check your inbox. So I think that there's definitely a lot of cuts that have been done, but also the way that it's been done has been kind of staining a lot of the employees that are there now as well.
And what was really interesting is I remember a time when, and by the way, this has application for you, because if you have a competitor across town and he or she leading or they or whomever they call themselves, the individual or the bot leading the company across town is able to do a little bit more for their team than you are, then they're going to be like the favorite place to go work, whether that's a restaurant or a construction company, whatever it is. And Google used to be the place you would go to, and you would hear about in Silicon Valley that you would have tribal movement. You would have people that were leaving, Meta because Metaverse happened, and then things were happening, and then, jobs were, at risk, and people are like, well, I'm taking off out of Meta before I'm doing that, and they would go over to Google, or they would go over to Twitter back when Twitter was hiring, and then maybe you saw how bloated it was, and Elon Musk laid off a bunch of people. But it used to be there's this tribal movements that go around Silicon Valley with the velocity of new product and the velocity of success.
Yep.
And we used to see it, and it used to be a true story that at lunch you could go someplace where a lot of Meta people were, you would see somebody there and say, well, I think I'm ready to do, really? What are you? Front end, back end engineer, full stack engineer, Python, what do you do? Says, well, I'm Really? Great. Database? Oh, I love it. I used to be a DBA. Oh, fantastic. And so literally people would have meaningful conversations over lunch like that by just sending a Slack to somebody, or they wouldn't be sending Slacks.
No.
They'd be sending private texts.
Yep.
They'd be sending like Discord, my Discord,
Telegram.
Telegram, right?
Then
they'd be gone.
WhatsApp.
And Google used to be the #1 destination. Hey man, they got laundry thing. You go park in the parking garage, you get on a bike and you ride it over here to here, and then you walk in with the bag that had your employee number on it. Here's my laundry, fluff and fold, light starch hanger, come back, boom, take them all home. Well, Google was doing all that to maximize the number of hours, but also to provide, a little bit more perks. These perks have been disappearing. They've been disappearing like the extra multiples on the PE ratio. Funny that. And so what's interesting is, I don't think Google is solely to blame to the slowdown that's happened in tech, but they certainly, I think, are solely to blame because I don't think they've managed it well, which is another lesson for you, entrepreneurs, leaders around the world, is when you have to downshift, the people that are leaving, the people that are staying are watching you, how you treated the people that are leaving. Absolutely. And if you're abrupt and you're not as compassionate as you can be, you don't owe them 2 years of severance. But if you're abrupt and not compassionate, then the people who are leaving are saying, So I'm a survivor this time, but that's the way this is going to roll here.
Yeah.
And it's in the back of their mind. It's said that when you lay off a person, there's an opportunity to lose 1/4 of a person throughout your company if you do it in a harsh way. Think about that. You lay off one person and you could lose up to 1/4 of every person in the company who watched that. In other words, every person, your stock falls with them 25%, and they think about, you know what? Gosh, if I hear things are that much tougher, maybe it's time for me to look around. And you know what? It's not the lazy. It's not the zombies that are just there collecting a paycheck. It's the top 30%. That's the ones you have to worry about. Because they're like, I know where my value is. I know what I can do. I'm going to go do it somewhere else.
Yeah, at a certain point, you get sick of it. And I think that in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily what happens to the company, because they, like the market downturns, they can't really control that. But it's also in how you communicate the changes and how they react to it is where people are really going to see it. Because if a company, like you're losing money or it has a bad quarter or something like that, it's like, obviously it's on the news, everyone knows it. But then also you kind of got to, okay, now we got to tighten up the belt a little bit. But if it's just slashing people and then continuing as business as usual, then it's definitely a bad taste for the people that are left, because it's like, well, what makes me think that I'm not next up on the chopping block?
And think about this. Google is coming up on 25 years old. I think it's coming up on its 25-year anniversary. And oh, by the way, I have a funny Google startup story.
Okay.
Very funny. So a individual I know at a East Coast-based, I'll say it, Bessemer Venture Capital is on the East Coast. And the guy from Bessemer comes and meets a woman who says, I got two engineers in my garage that want to talk to venture capitalists. And this particular venture capitalist was over visiting with this woman at her home. It was just a social meeting, because they weren't dating or anything. It was just literally business social meeting. Hey, drop by the house, meet me. She goes, in my garage, I got these 2 engineers working. Wow, really? What do they want? Well, they want some investment money. That's what all the engineers want. Well, what are they doing? Well, they think that the internet is going to be so complicated that search and finding things is going to be what's important. Is it a commerce company? No. Well, what is it? They believe that search will be the thing that helps you find everything on the internet, and they're in my garage working on it, and they want investment. And it is documented that he said the following: look, I'm going to finish my coffee, and is there any way that I can get from your kitchen to my car without going anywhere near your garage? True story. So it was that close for Bessemer Venture Capital. Isn't that great?
That must be.
How can I get from your kitchen, this coffee, and my car without going anywhere near your garage?
He should have swung by the garage.
He should have swung by the garage, exactly. But for 25 years, since that time, Google's been the place to be. You know what's interesting? Take a look. If you've been at Google for 20 years and you graduated at 26 years old from Stanford and you've been there 20 years, you're 46. So now you're in midlife. Your kids are probably 10, 15 years old now. Okay, here we go. And it is a fact that Googlers, as they call themselves, ran their own surveys, and there's a lot of them that feel that they are suffering from mental health issues in the equivalent of a pre-PTSD, because they're very worried about the future, and here the people are being laid off that says, do no evil, and all the things that Google stood for. There is a quote that said, many of us are having mental health issues, and we're coming to the realization we were expendable all along. So much for the big dream in the startup. 20 years later, we were expendables all along. Well, you know what? Economies will ebb and flow, things will happen, but Google's just doing it wrong, and now it's actually at greater risk, stock price aside, they're at greater risk of losing people, which I think was, it's kind of sad, because it's like Google is all grown up. Now they're your dad.
Yep, no, I think the other part too is the difference between perks and benefits. Because a lot of perks, especially in Silicon Valley, where you have the ping pong, you have the unlimited snack bar, you have the laundry pickup and what have you.
Bring your dog to work.
Exactly. You have a lot of perks. But in reality, there's also benefits, obviously 401k, health insurance, equity, or anything like that. So I think that in Silicon Valley, especially the last 20 years, what we've seen in terms of the boom of the tech economy, that the perks and the benefits have kind of blended together, where you think that just because you work there, you have a right to these perks, when in reality they're just perks. It's like they're additional there. But if you then start removing them, that's where you can start seeing some issues with a lot of people, and I think that's what we're seeing a lot of happening right now.
You know, Kellyanne, let's see if you can find something. Patrick Bet-David talked about charities about a month ago, and he talked about the cycle that charities go through with mega donors. And level 1 was appreciation, and then level 2, it got down, anyway, to save you all the journey, level 1 was appreciation, and then it got to expectation, and then it got to entitlement and resentment. That you start out with something good, and then they expected you to always be a donor. Then they felt entitled to your support. I'm working so hard, they felt entitled to your support. And finally, at the end, there was actually tension in the relationship.
Yep.
And that this is the same thing that happens with welfare recipients, and the same thing that happens with trust fund babies, about their feeling about the law firm and the stewards that are running the trusts. Because mom and dad have long passed away, now you're a trust fund baby, you're one of the Kennedys, you're one of the DuPonts. And by the way, look at the drug use and the responsibility among a lot of the Kennedy kids. I'm not talking about RFK Jr., who I have a lot of respect for. That's first generation. But you look at the Kennedy kids that were his kids and others, not a lot of responsibilities. And the DuPont family was famous for just grandkids out of frickin' control. Grandkids of the scion, and the kids were the first generation. And you have, you go from appreciation to expectation all the way down to resentment. It's like 5 stages.
Yep.
And it's like, if that just shows you, if you don't have purpose, your human heart turns dark. It's almost like the Bible was correct about all these things about if a man has purpose or a man works hard, he will find great pleasure in his work. You know, it's kind of amazing that it's true. And if a man does nothing, you know, he ultimately has a warped perspective. And so I think that's what happens with perks. What starts out as some things you're trying to do, hey, look, we want you working here, we want you working the hours, but we're going to help you with dry cleaning. We're going to have chefs in here. Cafeteria doesn't close at 2 o'clock. Come down anytime.
Yep.
We're going to have these sleeping pods where you can read a book and sleep in these egg-shaped chairs and have some peace and quiet. Take a real time out and break. Bring your dog to work. You know, there's all these services they had. Suddenly, everyone felt entitled to everything. Company grows up, trims the expenses, and it's like, screw you, I'm entitled. Yeah, well, go down the street, see if you can find it. Instead, they go down the street and they find another 10 grand a year and they're gone.
Yep. No, it's definitely an interesting cycle, and I think that's where they're getting a little bit confused. But then to also not completely shift blame off of Google, a lot of it goes down to how you communicate it too. If it's like, hey, we're losing money, we're trying to keep as many people as possible, we're trying to do great work, but some of that comes with sacrifices, and in this case, we're sacrificing dry cleaning service. I think that a lot of people would be like understanding and like, okay, I see what you're saying, as opposed to just slashing.
And by the way, Google is not Bed Bath and Beyond profitable, right?
No,
it's like,
exactly.
you know, or should I say Bed Bath and Beyond existence. No. But Google's going to be around, but it's lessons for all of us on how you do things.